been in outdoor education for 50 years. And I went to a conference recently where someone was talking about the history of Himalayan mountaineering. And as this person stood up and introduced 5 case studies, 5 biographies of these historical figures, I realized 3 of them were my friends. So I'm history. And I want to draw on some of that history to make some comments today about outdoor education, about how I think it should be for all and how it could be for all, which starts with analysis of why it currently isn't for all, and why not everybody is benefiting from what you might say is a right to see the stars. And that's a reference to the 25-year environment plan published last year, in which one of the strategic aims of that plan was to bring about that right for every young person to see the stars, to have a night away under the stars as part of their education. I am a professor, I am a researcher, but at heart, I'm a teacher. I have been for that 50 years. I didn't know that until I sat in front of a classroom and started teaching. But I also know that I'm not a teacher who likes classrooms. So forgive me in this context, because I'm a natural performer when I'm not in the classroom. It began long before me, however, this thing called outdoor education. And I want to reference a few names, not too many, through this lecture. The first being a Protestant bishop from the Czech Republic, Comenius. And we know his name because he gives his name now to a European Union program. Kamensky would be how he would be known in Czechia. He, in many ways, was the father of modern education, broader, not just of outdoor education. And he introduced education into what was Czechoslovakia at that time for all, including the impoverished, and this is in the 17th century, including girls. So everybody had a basic education, a primary education as a starting point. And he was the first in Europe to bring this about within a European state. It was universal, but it was also practical, and a lot of the education was in practical matters, not academic, not intellectual. And it included a significant amount of time in the outdoors. They went on camps, they foraged, they gardened, they fished, they went to run and to swim, to hunt. They enjoyed sports outdoors. They had evenings around the fire where they played music and sang Czechoslovakian folk songs. That practice throughout the 17th and onwards into the 18th century became what the Czechs called turistika. And turistika is a community engagement now with the outdoors. Not a school-based thing. And it was touristica, it was the summer camps on which the Czech people spent a lot of their summer holidays, but kept their culture alive during the Soviet occupation. And because the Soviets controlled the cities, but they let people get on with things in the countryside because it didn't cause too much disruption or trouble. And that's where the Czech culture was kept flourishing so that it could resurface and reassert itself when they returned to democracy. And that idea of outdoor education and culture is a theme that we'll come back to. Comenius went on to advise Germany, Poland, Sweden, England, and Scotland on their early primary education programs, and indeed was a founder of Harvard University in the USA. So he was quite a guy in relation to the history of education. Not getting.
Is it turned off?
It's turned on.
Last thing you just try it.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So what am I going to cover in this lecture? Well, I'm going to take it for granted that outdoor education is a good thing. This is not a lecture to demonstrate all of the research that has gone on now over an extended period of time in a lot of areas to make the case for the benefits of outdoor education, or indeed the different practices, the different ways that outdoor education goes forward. We know that it has impacts on physical and mental well-being and is increasingly being thought of as an important contribution to people's health and green social prescribing. We know that it has cognitive, metacognitive, and non-cognitive outcomes, both holistic in its impacts. It's important in identity formation for young people in their transformation from child to youth and from youth to adult. It offers opportunities for personal and social development, and again, increasingly a focus on its potential for developing nature connection and pro-environmental behaviours. I wrote a paper once called Outdoor Education is a many splendid thing. And of course, we would argue that it does everything for everybody all of the time. It is one of its problems that it is so versatile that it's quite hard for people to get a grip of, well, what is this thing? What do I, how can I make use of it? What can it do for me? But on the same side of it being a good thing, it's also an exclusive thing. It has been something where the practitioners who have had the affordances of a great landscape around them, who have a lifestyle they want to live in those great landscapes, where after the Second World War, we placed most of our outdoor centres in those wonderful coastal and mountain landscapes and the new national parks that were emerging at that time. The opportunities to experience outdoor education have been partial and have been for those for certain groups. It's less likely these days than it used to be, in fact, to be offered as part of a school's activity, especially secondary schools at this time, or even as an adjunctive in after school or at weekends or in the holidays. It's less likely to occur than it used to be. And this is particularly heightened in areas of low socioeconomic demographics and hyper-urban settings, or often, of course, those two combined, both of those. So this lecture is going to set out to explore this inequity, and I'm going to use the critical pedagogical thinking of Basil Bernstein to help me along, sort of to set the scene. What are the issues? What are these barriers? How can we understand them in order to wrestle with them? I want to apply these thoughts of Bernstein's to three particular areas: to pedagogy, to access, and to infrastructure in the urban contexts. I'm going to reflect on practice and policy that has made a difference, where it's working, so examples of things actually happening and working well. And finally, I'd like to be a bit of a stargazer myself, a bit utopian, and say, okay, what could education look like that would be inclusive of not just outdoor education, but some other things as well? What would be the structure of a future education that could offer outdoor education to all? Now, I know it's possible because my first job was as a comprehensive school teacher at Stanley School in Colchester. I understand a high-performing school these days. It was a great school then. This was an interesting time to become a teacher 1973. The comprehensive movement was getting well underway. The school that I was in as a student, secondary school I was in as a student, went from a single-sex boys' grammar school to a mixed grammar school to a comprehensive school in the 7 years that I was part of it. So it was a very time of great change. The 1973 is when the school leaving age went up from 15 to 16, and all around us the labour market was changing. All those jobs in industry were beginning to disappear, and the new jobs in the service sector and the digital economy, the tech economies were beginning to appear, and what was needed now was not was skilled labour. And there was this bunch of young people who hadn't expected to stay in school for an extra year, ouch. B now no longer had an idea where they were going to find a job, because they'd been prepared for something that was rapidly vanishing in front of their eyes. Stanley School is an urban fringe school, so it's not quite the hyper-urban setting that that I might be talking about mostly today, but it was on the edge of Colchester in amongst housing estates that were overspill estates built for commuters coming out of London and commuting back into London. And part of its catchment was also rural, the rural landscapes of that part of Essex down to the coast. One of the teachers there, who was one of my mentors, used to say she loved the kids coming out of the East End of London because they had spunk. And she said, to illustrate this, she talked about how she would take them up to London and into Trafalgar Square, and then halfway back on the bus, she'd find that some child had a pigeon in their rucksack. This is the kind of young people that she liked to educate. So when I joined that school, I joined to be a geography and geology teacher. I only had 10 days notice and no plans to be a teacher. I wasn't trained to be a teacher. This also was the last year you could become a teacher without teacher training. So I slipped in under the law. Being the last person in, of course, what do we do with all these kids who've got to stay on an extra year became landed on my plate, well, on my boss's plate, and my boss said to me, why don't you do outdoor stuff with them? You have some outdoor skills. That's my childhood, my background. I'd never heard of the term outdoor education nor of the school. And there was a massive truancy problem going on with these kids not turning up to school. Because we hadn't heard of the term outdoor education, we called it NBA. Non-vocational activities, which is probably the longest set of words that some of these kids had learned to spell, actually. They all had that tripping off their tongues because they wanted to do it. It was good. And the area, I came from the West Country and I went to the university in Sheffield with the Peak District on my doorstep. So I didn't immediately think I could do this in Colchester, but golly, I could. There were forests, there were rivers, there were commons, there was a coastline, there was a sailing base that the county ran. It had a tall ship down in the harbour by the coast. There were climbing walls, indoor climbing walls in gyms in the area. The affordances of the area actually are an awful lot richer than I imagined when I looked. And they were all accessible as long as you had a friendly timetabler who could give you triple lessons. Poor students who had to do triple maths while we were doing triple canoeing. He was on my side, as was the head. And that kind of support was critical in the programming that gradually developed. We also had a very supportive PTA. So this wasn't necessarily a particularly poor area. And they were able to buy me a minibus and a fleet of kayaks. And the local university gave us a fleet of sailing dinghies as well. So we gradually built up a fantastic resource. Just behind, this is Stanley School, just behind the gym here used to be a potting shed, rural studies. And rural studies had just been brought to an end. And that became my classroom. So as a young person in the 4th year, as it was in those days, you'd walk through the gym, which is a different culture anyway within a school. There's a different relationship with PE teachers. Round the back, by the time you got round to the potting shed, your tie had come off, and it was all right to use first names. In 10 years, 40 kids a year in each of the cohorts we worked with, no child ever broke the rule of calling me by my first name in the main school, and no child ever called me by my surname or sir in the potting shed. It became part of the ritual of how you recognise that this was a different space, and that's all coming back to the pedagogy side of things in a bit. I had, in the end, a team of 4, a geographer, a PE teacher, a drama teacher, and the community police officer. He was fantastic, and had an interest in these kids because, well, you might imagine there was, I was often offered the school video player at the end of the summer holiday. Would you like to buy a video player, sir? That happened at least 3 times. And of course, I suggested that they might like to return it before I reported it to the community police officer, just standing here. The programme became 2 years long as an alternative curriculum model. We did adventure activities in the summer, and we did conservation work through the winter. We did some gardening too for some while. We had a goal that every young person on the programme would either complete a 3 or 4 day self-reliant journey, a bit like a Silver Duke of Edward's Award Scheme idea, or that they would compete in some outdoor competition, a sailing or regatta or an orienteering event or something like that. And many of them did indeed do those things. 50% of the week was outdoors with me, 50% was course subjects. And the brilliant thing about that was that within 2 years, the English department were knocking on my door and saying, we don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it, because the kids actually want to learn in their reading and writing, because they've got things they want to talk about and write about. And that actually, we didn't expect them to get CSEs as they were then, but now we're expecting them to get CSE passes. And indeed, within 4 years of working with different departments in the school, we managed to get to the point where there was an average of 3 CSEs being passed by this group that hadn't expected to get any public exam results. And 3 CSEs was enough to get an access course to go to an FE college, and maybe a trade would follow on from that. We were beginning to solve this problem of how they could progress in this new emerging society and the new work opportunities. Mr. McNaughton was the last person to come on board. He was the maths teacher, head of maths, the disciplinarian in the school, and of course he had some of these then called bad lads in those days in his tutor group because of his reputation. And they challenged him to a sailing race. And that's how we got him on board. We went up to the sailing centre. A school was just finishing up. They'd not been sailing because somebody had stolen something from somebody else in the changing rooms. Everybody was going home with their tails between their legs. My group got out of the bus, went into the changing rooms, went down to the shore, rigged the boats, went out in the safety boat, put out the sailing course, perfect for the wind of the day, rigged the maths teacher's boat, let the sail a little slack, of course, which he spotted, and they even let him win. Actually, I think he won on his own merit, but when we got back in the bus at the end of the session, he sat beside me in the minibus and said, I'm going straight to the head teacher when I get back. And I thought, oh, I wonder what he saw in this changing room that I didn't see. I had an afternoon of teaching in my classroom, and sure enough, at the end of the day, the head teacher was outside my classroom and said, can I have a word? He said, right, that you've won over the head of maths. He's going to change everything he teaches. He'll do your navigation and your knot tying for you in his maths classes from here on. And by the way, I'm going to give double your budget. I'm going to give you 2 members of staff and double the number of kids I want you to work with. We had a reverse exclusion problem. The kids who did well in the school, what's the problem? They want a choice, so they can get on our programme. Ed had an answer to that. Let's give everybody in the school the right to outdoor education. And so it became my job to run the DOV scheme, run the sailing club, and to run 3 residentials, at least 3 residentials, or enough residentials, so that every child got to go on at least 3 residentials through their time at school. Then he went on 4 or 5. The field study trips as well as the more personal and social development kind of projects. My favourite were the drama residentials, they were great. The truancy rate came down 95%, the exam classes went up. Okay, so it can be done. It could be done in that particular climate. 70s was the golden era for me, and I left teaching in 1983, just before I guess I would have begun to find it a lot more difficult to flourish in the kind of educational work that I learned to do. So I want to introduce you to Basil Bernstein, who was a critical pedagogue from the 60s through to the early 2000s. And I'll touch on a number of his ideas. In his analysis of educational policy, he thought that there were three things that the Education Act was really offering young people. And one was aspiration, the chance that you could go to school, that you could join in, that it was a meaningful and engaging set of experiences wherever you came from, that you had the chance to be included, that you could be part of the choices about what you learned and what you did well at, that you were accepted, you were recognised, you got status in some way as you went through school. And that you could participate, not just in school life, but in society, that by the time you were ready for it, you had agency and you could claim rights, but also exercise responsibilities. And that he saw as a summary of the main aims of the Education Act of the 1940s. He said that schools generally, he thought, were good at aspiration and inclusion, not so good at participation. And they could do better, would be his judgment. He thought that in the early part of the 20th century, education was trying to develop workers who were submissive and inflexible, because they knew what they were going to do. If you had a skill in this area, that was your pathway through to a certain kind of job, or a certain kind of further or higher education, and then a certain kind of job. And he thought after the Second World War that changed, and his view was that we needed to develop learners, students who were conforming but flexible because of the rapidly changing economy and society into which they were emerging. His second idea I'd like to introduce you to is his idea of two forms of curriculum at the end of either end of the spectrum. The collection curriculum is a curriculum where knowledge is determined way up in senior academics and universities, and then is passed down as immutable facts through the education system and offered in the subject arrangements of a school through subject specialists to students as a given. The integrated curriculum, on the other hand, was a curriculum in which knowledge was mutable, where you could develop ideas of your own, where your own experience and your own knowledge of the world you lived in counted for something and could contribute to the development of learning and teaching together. I love the Welsh word dysgu, for example, in this regard. It means both teach and learn. It captures the relationship pedagogy between teacher and student, rather than this idea of teaching or learning having a dominance. And you can see from my example of Stanley School how these students were willing to accommodate a collection curriculum of their core subjects. Their literacy went way down across the whole of their education, not just for the outdoor stuff. As long as they got 50% of it that was integrated, that was co-constructed, where they could make choices, where they could express their creativity, their leadership, where they could find meaning, where they could find things they were good at that they could put on as an identity and feel proud of, and skills and interests that they could see they could keep going forward, both vocational and MVA, non-vocational. So that balance of the two had worked really well for us, but perhaps is one of the main opportunities that outdoor education has to offer to schools is a way, like the PE department maybe, and like the art department maybe, where pedagogy has this more integrated rather than collection style, as Bernstein captures it. Okay. So what do I mean by this thing, outdoor education? It's a very splendid thing. Let's narrow it down a bit. Let's get to my own particular preferences in regard to this. Outdoor education for me are facilitated experiences that help students understand themselves with intra and interpersonal understanding and their cultural and natural landscapes. It's a very holistic idea, and many different bits of what goes on in a school can contribute to that holism. It might deliver some curriculum content here. It might be a process, a pedagogy of how to work together somewhere else. It might be a subject in its own right in a third part of the school. It might happen week by week in a forest school kind of arrangement, or it might be episodic with residential experiences or day trips. And all of that has value, and that diversity is of value and comes together perhaps then to meet this idea of something that what are the, if you like, the rules of the game that do make it work well? We do know that too. Firstly, it needs to be progressive. It needs to be progressive in the sense that the students can get good at learning that way. They become experts at being outdoor learners. One group of students I interviewed in the Learning Away project told me how on the first year when they went on the residential with the 8-person tents, bell tents, they couldn't put them up. They didn't know how, and they weren't strong enough. So the teachers put them up for them, and they just held on to bits and pieces. The second time they went on a residential 2 years later, they had an idea of what to do, but they still needed the teacher's help to put the big central pole up in the middle of the tent and to whack the pegs in. The third time they went on the residential, 2 years after that, they put the tent up for themselves, and then they taught new people coming in for the first time how to put their tent up. And they said, and this is their remarks at year 6 now, saying, if we can learn how to do that over a period of time, we can learn how to do maths, we can learn how to do science. You know, we know how to learn, essentially. So that progression of both on a daily sort of drip feed basis, but also the episodic events like residentials, like day trips, so that they become, and the teachers become good at learning and teaching in these kinds of ways. It can be, as a result, it can be cognitive, like field studies, it can be non-cognitive, like personal and social development, and it can be metacognitive, as in learning to learn. It needs to be inclusive. Everyone is involved. You don't have an entry fee. You don't have it after school so that some students don't get the chance to go. You don't have a price on it that excludes young people from being able to go. And you don't do things that will mean that some parents will say, well, my child's not doing that. You work with your community to create inclusive opportunities. And ideally, it's integrated. It's not something you do extra. It's not adjunctive. It's integrated into the school, into the daily day of the school. So it happens in the school day, like my program at the school. We would run on into the evening in the summer a little bit to make the most of things, but mostly it happened during the school day. So it was part of school life. And you could see the difference, not just in the classroom, but you could see the difference in the corridor, in the playground. One of the secondary schools I worked with in Learning Away, after 2 years, the head turned around and said, you know what, we've not excluded anybody yet this year. We've never done that before. And the only thing we're doing differently, we're running residential experiences. We're socialising with students and the teachers in ways that mean we don't get the trouble that we used to get. We're obviously meeting a need in ways that allow our students to stay and to learn this. And ideally, they're co-constructed. We have some great examples in that project of students designing their own residentials. Year 6, Barrow schools, in primary schools in Year 6, designing their own transition residentials. They were asked what activities will help you the most to make the transition to the big school. You'll never guess what activity they chose. We didn't. Telling scary stories in our tents at night. If we can cope with listening to scary stories in our tents, we can cope with anything at the big school. And indeed, that proved to be the case. And the teachers said that they would get, when they got those young people from the transition residentials, that they'd be, by October, they would be where they would normally expect to be by December in the delivery of the curriculum, because the kids settled down and knew how to work together and trusted each other and were happy. What does this look like? So is this actually achievable? Am I just talking out the top of my head? Is this, can this be done? Well, it's being done on our doorstep right now. The Welsh curriculum is doing it, and it's doing it in a way that Bernstein would be very proud of, because they talk about, this is just for show, I'm not expecting you to go to read this, and it's too fuzzy to do that. But at this end of the progression from early childhood, early years, right the way through to top secondary, they're talking about participation, about citizenship, about being involved in the environment and the care for it and the study of it on behalf of the community at this end. And it's got the full range of benefits here. Look at all these benefits right across the what they're calling the emotional content and the cognitive content that we talked about earlier. So, and this is being implemented as we speak in Wales. Scotland likewise recommends outdoor education in the curriculum for excellence as a way to deliver education for sustainability. And this, in England, it is simply recommended as a good way to teach, with no mandating or no resources. Although some people do use their pupil premium very effectively to fund outdoor education. Let's have a little bit more look at what outdoor education is actually doing for society, as well as what is it doing for education. This is very recent data from the Children's People and Nature Survey by Natural England. Initially, it looks really good. There's some high figures here of young people participating in nature. But actually, when you look at the figures, 85% of young people go outdoors as part of schooling because of PE. So it's playing games on a football pitch or something of that kind. Only 23% get an experience out of doors in school that isn't related to PE. Likewise, over here, we have what happens at home. 60% of young people only go outside in their garden if they've got one. And 50%, only 50% go outside further afield than that, outdoors, further afield from that. So in many ways, I think, and certainly I would think this because of my generation, I suppose, that outdoor experiences, a lot of what should happen in the outdoors, just like it happens in sport and the arts and other cultural goods in our society, is actually something which should happen in family life and in community life. And we've lost it. By and large, we've lost it. I got kicked out the door on a weekend in the morning and not expected back until dusk, and nobody minded where I was. And if I needed help, I'd run crying in the front door. That's only not horses and barn. Used to kick us sometimes, and probably were irritating. So there's a lot of loss gone on, I think. We don't have any figures for what it was like 2 generations ago, but there's an awful lot of narrative to suggest that young people did have a lot more scope, even in urban areas. It's an interesting study in Sheffield. I think it was Sheffield, might have been down near Sheffield, looking at how far young people used to roam without adult involvement in 3 different generations. And it's gone from a 10-mile radius to go fishing at a pond on the edge of the town, for example, down to the end of the street in 3 generations. And a lot of young people experience their landscapes, particularly urban landscapes, streets, playgrounds, parks, as hostile places. They don't experience them, even if they do go outdoors or have to go outdoors, as places which they relish, where they can flourish and where they can enjoy themselves. So although there is this history of going outdoors as part of family life, for some parts of our community, and that we've lost this, I think this is a really important aspect of what schools can pick up and say it's essentially remedial. We're putting back in place something that perhaps schools shouldn't have to do, but how else are we going to reach all young people everywhere with these opportunities? And so the key here is it's not just young people that are not getting out, it's parents and it's teachers. Teachers aren't taking the kids out partly because they don't have those experiences as in their youth either. It's not somewhere that's familiar, valued, and comfortable for them anymore. It is the parents in many cases. There are various reasons for this. Kids are safer, haven't never been safer outdoors, in fact, than they are at the moment. They've never been more at risk in some ways in the home. And yet, stranger danger is a big feature of our society. We have too many young households, so we have parents who don't have the time to organise recreational and social time with the family in any context, let alone outdoors. And we have a very individualised society where people want things instantly, and outdoors needs organising, it needs coming together, it needs groups, it needs resources, it needs things to happen that don't happen so well in an individualised societies. Those outdoor activities that do flourish tend to be the ones that you can do instantly without having to think too much about it. You jump on your bike and go for a raft. Those sorts of things still go on, I'm glad to say. So it's important that schools offer outdoor education as a remedial offer to our society. And the challenge is, how do we make teachers comfortable with offering that in a way that they value? Because the benefits of going outside are, as this graph suggests, also from the People and Nature Survey, as much benefits to the teachers as they are to the children. Nobody's ever asked that question before. I was really excited by that graph. That teachers get the benefit, social and cognitive and pedagogical benefits of going outside, just as much as the young people do. We call it in the Learning Away project the I saw Miss in Pyjamas effect. And it was a young girl who was trying to explain to us why Miss had become human in her eyes, and that made a big difference to her. In the Swedish example, for a 2-day residential, every subject in the Swedish primary school curriculum was integrated one at a time, not all at once, into a residential. One overnight it would be maths, the next it might be Swedish, the next it might be science, whatever. And they then did a comparative study with schools that were learning that subject content in a traditional classroom way. The residential, the knowledge acquisition was 4 times greater than the knowledge acquisition of those in the classroom, and the knowledge retention was 10 times greater than the knowledge retention of those in the classroom. One of the lovely things about it was that those residentials were made possible by parental and community engagement in creating the residential experiences along with the teachers and the pupils. So the outdoors offers this different pedagogical space and integrated curriculum, as my project at Stanley School suggests. And that what I think that delivers is engagement. It delivers young people who are learning to learn, loving learning to learn, and loving themselves and their peers and their teachers more so than they might be otherwise. And in that collaborative space, the space that my potting shed created for me, we can create a very different atmosphere as well as very different learning opportunities. It's a very diverse landscape too. I like to think of it as a landscape metaphor. I would as a geographer. It's a very complex landscape. Any outdoor opportunity, even school grounds, is a fantastically complex set of opportunities. And young people enter this, however much you steer them or frame it or lead them, they're going to notice different things and get up to different things and have different opportunities, make different friendships, notice different things around them, play a different role in the group. And they're going to come out the other side of that landscape with their own particular outcomes and benefits. And the trick for the teacher is not always just driving for a particular benefit that the teacher is seeking, though that's also, of course, valid, but also to recognise all these other things that are going on that are particular and individual to each student who's just made a new friend or just feels confident because they've got that tent up for by themselves or listen to that scary story, and to recognise those achievements as well. So that, because recognition of what has been learned is so important rather than keeping it locked up internally in the minds of the child. And those engagements with experience, with peer groups, with teachers, is what leads to the outcomes that we are mostly excited about, of course, in a school which is per se attainment. We can get to heightened attainment, both SATs and GCSEs and the Scottish equivalents. We have a growing amount of evidence of that relationship between experience, engagement, and then attainment. Means it's really important, actually, that those young people go on these outdoor experiences in their school peer groups with their teachers, because it's those relationships you want to affect and want to foster and help to flourish. Okay, so what are the barriers? What are the barriers in these areas where outdoor education is struggling? Well, this lass here is on a residential from a primary school in this part of London, just north of you. This colour on this map is the area with the least green space in London. You do slightly better. You do slightly better. You're light green, but and the best places are these this dark blue place along the western side of London, along the Thames corridor. 48% of London is publicly accessible green or blue space. Did you know that? 48% geographically. It doesn't mean it's nice. It could be very hostile. It could be very brownfield. It could be very gloomy and overgrown. But what a resource is actually there, given the will. And often it's communities that turn these spaces around and make them, occupy them, and make them people friendly. And there are many examples of that. 21% of students we know in the UK go on, I'm using this as an example, residentials. That means that on average, every student goes on 2 residentials through their life as a student. And that may be their only opportunity for an outdoor education experience. But what we also know is that that opportunity is hugely varied. And as we've said already, it is those from low socioeconomic communities, those that are hyper urban, and those that have got a cultural gap between themselves and their knowledge of the outdoors and the value of the outdoors, that will find they don't get these opportunities. And it's there that we need to put our effort. We need, I think, to shift outdoor education so that it's not about taking these young people from these areas, from these places, into the rural landscapes where the outdoor education provision is. I would like to see that reversed. Let's take nature to the people as well as people to the nature. We need those first stepping stones on the doorstep for regular access, frequent access, as well as the opportunities then to go on a day trip, to go on a residential, to broaden your horizons and go beyond the boundaries of your town or city. And we really do, I think, from an educational point of view, need to argue for that access on the doorstep. Pedagogy was my second point. I was a student at the Blue School, not that flourishing school these days. It became comprehensive while I was in the sixth form. And I was taken on adjunctive outdoor trips by Dr. Taylor, chemistry teacher. He took me hill walking in Snowdonia twice, 2 successive years. I followed him everywhere with all of the students in thick mist on both occasions, poured with rain on several days each time. We followed him over various mountains that I've since learned the names of, but didn't then. I didn't hold a map, I didn't hold a compass. I was just told to put a packed lunch in my rucksack and carry waterproofs and follow Sir. But the same teacher taught me to sail. He took me to a sailing centre. He showed me on land what the bits of the boat were and how the wind worked in relation to the sails. And then 2 of us got in one of these dinghies and he pushed us off, and we had to work it out for ourselves from those instructions, what it actually meant physically and to make the boat go with those basic ideas. And each time we went, he added another layer. So he became a very good coach. And what was it about sailing that led him to be a great coach, that we became independent, autonomous sailors, compared with how he went about going hill walking, which I never learned to hill walk at school. I did learn later on in life, but at the time at school, I couldn't have done a walk as a result of my time in Snowdonia, because I picked up no skills. What was it pedagogically that led him to do one thing one way and one thing the other? One gave me a lot of agency, the other left me as just incompetent and unable to go forward. Bernstein says that a lot of the things that we do in school are taken from the real world. Sorry, schools. And you are the real world too, of course. But you take something like carpentry and you bring it into school and it becomes woodwork. And you just, as in that process, you can reproduce certain qualities of what carpentry is like, or you can transform, change them. Climbing is a great example. When climbing comes into education, you do not do lead climbing in education. Everything has top ropes, everything is safe. We transform the act of climbing in a way that makes it possible within education. And its purpose has changed. It's about trust, and it's about communications, and it's about confidence and problem solving. And it becomes about educational goods rather than recreational goods. And so we have this process where we transform things, but we don't transform everything. And some of the things that come with hill walking are this idea that the leader leads from the front and you just follow. Whereas in sailing, the tradition in the RYA, the Royal Yachting Association, is coaching. Same with kayaking. You can't get in a kayak with somebody and do it for them. You have to put them in the kayak and they have to work out how to make it go for themselves. So sometimes the affordances of the activity demand a certain pedagogy. So just because it's outdoors doesn't mean it's one of those lovely integrated curriculums. The baggage of the way in which the outdoor recreational activity works can get in the way. And that just as an example, it may be why that despite the fact that I really enjoyed hill walking and I became a hill walker in due course. And one of the famous quotes from Ofsted is that no matter how bad it was a residential, not an outdoor experience, but it was an outdoor residential. No matter how bad the residential experience, it is still worth doing. That even a bad one, it still has all those wonderful outcomes. But what could you do with a good one? Even more so. So what would have happened if Dr. Taylor had adopted his coaching tactics on the school dress? Is the parallel. And this gets us to language codes, another one of Bernstein's major thoughts. What does that poster bring to mind there in terms of accessibility? This is a poster on the wall of an outdoor centre for young people from Wigan. Does it make you think, oh, this is for me? They might get excited by all the things that it represents, but mostly that's very exclusive, isn't it? How on earth could a young person who's never been beyond Wigan before imagine being that person in the photograph? So you can go around some outdoor centres and all the images on the wall are like that. High-end adventurous doing high-end adventure in remote places. And in other outdoor centres, you can go around and see posters on the wall of what the kids were doing last week at the centre. Big happy smiley faces, getting muddy and wet and friendly and cheerful and cheering. And that's what I think we're talking about here with Bernstein's language codes. The restrictive code that says barriers up. Yeah, you've got to be in the club before you can actually imagine. And the barriers to getting into this club are pretty high. We've got our own language, we've got our own locations, we've got our own kit. I remember our kids coming out of Stanley School couldn't go to the mountaineering club because they met in the pub. For 2 years, that meant they couldn't get to join the mountaineering club, even though they had the skills to be mountaineers. So they didn't get the support from the community to continue. Whereas the canoe club met by the river and went canoeing. So they went canoeing, of course, because they could join that club. So these restrictive codes, well, not just language codes, not just the words we use. I'm a sailor, so I know how restrictive the language codes of sailing can be, with all the names for ropes and bits of the boat and things that we do. And somebody turns to you and says, "Do I pull this rope?" And you're saying, "It's not a rope, it's a yard, it's a sheet," or it's extremely inaccessible. Or you can work at it when it's transformed from that recreation context into that educational one, into what Bernstein called elaborated codes, ones that are accessible, ones that welcome you in, ones that say, "Hey, you can imagine doing this for yourself. Here's some happy, cheerful people that look like you doing it in a place that you're going to visit tomorrow, and you can come back and do it again." That, I think, is one of the big issues that creates barriers in outdoor education, because a lot of these activities, let's face it, are delivered and were developed in the recreational world and brought into the education world by white middle-class men. And that means that for anybody else, they might not look quite so friendly. In fact, they could look very unfriendly. So what we need is some co-construction of this approach, of these ways of working in outdoor education, these pedagogies. Here, I don't know, you might be in the picture actually. There. Where are you? Yeah, there you are. Right. This is a surprise, by the way. This is an international master's program that we ran at Ambleside. Actually, was a student from India on the program who happened to be in London today. I'm so excited. So we need that co-construction in this case, so that a multicultural group of young people can be in the Lake District, or in this case, that a group of young girls can go mountain biking and get muddy and cheerful. And one of the biggest barriers we find, indeed, in primary schools is parents saying, "Don't send my kids home muddy." I can't got enough clothes to keep sending them back to school the next day clean. I don't have enough money to be able to put a washing machine on. These are real issues. And so you have to have, in this case, all the kit. And the school provides the clothes and the school does the washing, and therefore everybody gets to go out and get muddy, but mum and dad never know. When they do, but they never have to deal with it. They just might have the smiling time kids who want to go to bed. And the activities themselves, they are the traditional activities of outdoor education often prevail in outdoor centres. But we know that actually new activities arise outside of the world of outdoor education because they meet the needs and interests of those young people. Mountain biking is a great example of this. BMX bikes and skateboards, all of these things, which are really well suited to some settings in urban areas, have really taken off, and you get some wonderful urban infrastructure built to accommodate mountain biking. I'm going to come back to that. But another good example is the way in which open water swimming has made the outdoors accessible, particularly to women. It's been massively taken up by women who will never access the outdoors or anything adventurous or anything immersive like that before. But suddenly it becomes a thing that they can do. If you do anything for girls in secondary schools in London, create safe water for them to go open water swimming in. Because look, what it really has taken on. Another one would be stand-up paddle boards. I looked at those and said, who would ever want to do that? Kayaking is the thing. It's so accessible. It's affordable, it's quick, it's easy. If you're safe, you're not contained in, you don't feel at risk falling in. If you fall in, you just climb back out onto the board again. There's so many aspects of it that are more accessible than a canoe or a kayak with its skill levels and its own challenges. This is a great example. Whitewell Primary Schools visited it a couple of times. Their catchment is an estate on which the young families of people who've gone to sea with the Royal Navy live. It's a Royal Navy housing estate. They're mostly 17, 18, 19, 20 years old mums with 1, 2, 3 kids maybe from all over the country. So there's no social structure in this housing estate. We've got young mums who don't really know which way's up. We've got kids who've been pulled out of their friendship groups and brought to Plymouth. And the school wanted to say, well, what can we do to get these young people? Because they're right on the edge of Dartmoor. They don't even know it's there. It's one bus stop away from the school, 10p. And they said, let's get them picnicking. So they said to the parents, why don't we go picnicking on Dartmoor? And the mums all said, well, we don't know how to do that. They've never made a picnic. We've been picnicking. So the school was great. They said, okay, come into the school. We'll do a picnic in the classroom, you and the kids. So that was the first week. The second week was, now we'll do it in the school playground with the webs. And we'll do it outside. So we can cope with what we do with wasps and making sure you find a dry patch and what the blankets for and things. And games you can play. And then the next time you go to the supermarket, here's the money. You buy the ingredients and make the picnic, and we'll have it. You will have a picnic you made in school. And then the next week, let's go up to Dartmoor, one bus stop by, and you're on the edge of Dartmoor, and let's have a picnic there. And of course, by then the kids are saying, Mum, can we go back to Dartmoor for the weekend? And Mum says yes, because she's also got some friends she can go with now, because she's made friends in the picnicking group. It was a brilliant piece of outdoor education, picnicking. Who'd have thought, just like scary stories in the tent, isn't it? It's not what we would have thought of, but it was exactly the thing. And food is one of those things that, like water seems to be, that really does bring people out of the woodwork and get people to come together, especially if you want to do multi-generational things with parents and as well as kids. Food's a great way of getting everybody to rock up. And to start socialising. One last thought was the infrastructure. So, from a planning perspective, I've never thought of the outdoors as anything other than it's just there. And I make use of it. I'm lucky I lived and worked in lots of beautiful, accessible areas, and I've had the opportunity and the resources to access those things. So it's only when I went to a conference at Derby University some years ago, run by Miles Richardson, that it was half full of landscape architects and planners. I thought, what are they here for? Of course, urban landscapes, they're designed, aren't they? They're planned, they're put together. And there's lots of politics over whether it's a housing estate or a mountain bike track, or a park or a school playground, and so on. So they become really important parts of the outdoor education professional stakeholders, the relationships with planners and landscape designers. They become our best friends. I think it's really important that we take this route. And there are so many opportunities in urban areas in the infrastructure. Here, parkour, I'm going to a conference on Friday in Amberside. The two sellout workshops are parkour workshops. It's the new thing in outdoor education. The campus manager said to the people running the workshop, please don't teach them things that they'll then do in Amberside. Our reputation with the Amberside residents isn't as good as we'd like it to be at the best of times. I hope they do. But just using the infrastructure that's already there. And this is active travel. This is a cargo bike, and taking the family out on cargo bikes. And there's a lot of opportunities just with the existing infrastructure to cycle. And of course, there's some lovely purpose-built infrastructures is too. One of the things I loved in terms of accessibility, by the way, was the Olympics. Did anybody watch the BMX or the skateboarding? You know, the way that those young people presented themselves, the way they dressed, their manner, their equitable way of looking out for each other. We were just so different from the other athletes. It felt really accessible. I found myself completely drawn to it. Loved watching it. But of course, these things have entry prices. These are expensive bits of research, and so not for everyone. There is legacies from the past. Here in London, you have many, and they're there to protect. Just down the road, you've got a canal. A youth worker I used to work with in this part of London, Dave Bruce, used to use the canal to do canoe trips on with his youth group. But the problem was the lock gates. He couldn't get the students to get excited about portaging around lock gates, and that sort of limited their range. So he thought, how do I make portaging fun? And he came up with the idea that during the winter, he'd set up the park the canoe trailer outside the supermarket and say, okay, the first group to get in the supermarket to the back and back out through the checkout, carrying their canoe, you get a bottle of lemonade. And that was it. They were into practically and the supermarkets were not into Dave Bruce. But he was great at creating lots of canoe games to work with swimming pools, canals, and what would seem to be a limited set of assets, but fantastic opportunities he was able to create with those, using the legacy spaces from the past. New technologies are emerging all the time that bring traditional outdoor activities into urban areas. Bits of real rock to satisfy the passions of people who like to boulder. This is a surf wave. It's a standing wave. You can be on it for hours. It doesn't move. It just stays there, and you can surf on it. I expect the people on the bank are wishing you'd fall in to get their turn. And there is, of course, indoor ski domes and things like that bring those sorts of things in. And of course, we can bring in other aspects of rural life, urban farming and peri-urban farming, fantastic opportunities. Comenius, that bishop, was the founder of the kindergarten movement. And the kindergarten movement was two things. It was literally a garden around which the curriculum was constructed, as well as metaphorically a place where you grew children. And both of those interpretations were meant by Comenius. So yeah, gardening, great if you've got school grounds as well, great. And of course, wildlife has agency too. You don't have to do all the work. It will come in of its own accord, and let it and encourage it, whether it's pollinating plants or whether it's the peregrines of the city of London, or whether it's the urban foxes, more foxes in urban London than there are in rural home counties. There is opportunities here to encourage this and work with this rather than try and discourage it and work against it. take the pigeonhole in the rucksack behind the front. And there are so many opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, of places that brownfield sites, public spaces at the moment are derelict or do not feel safe, that can be recovered. And the whole process of recovering that becomes a community project, a school project, and gives people a sense of ownership and responsibility. Fantastic ways forward. So there's a lot that people can go for to make things happen. I wanted to just finish on a couple of good examples of practice. For small scale first, two British examples. This example here on the right, sorry, is the Trash Mob Academy in Wakefield. The Trash Mob is a group of mountain bikers or cyclists who clean up trails where they cycle while they cycle. It's a big national project. But they thought, why don't we take it into a crew, into a school which was running a crew, an academy school. And let's get the kids mountain biking, but collecting the trash as well. And they get to do mountain biking on Friday, but they only get to do it if they turn up to school Monday to Thursday. Then they get their mountain biking, they coach on mountain biking, they go on competitions, they go on tours, they get they found lots of challenging routes they can do in and around Wakefield from the school with minimum transport. The mountain biking group turn up with the trailer full of bikes and the helmets and the sticking plasters, and off they go. And then they collect the trash. And if you watch the video, it's a short video of the last Joe who set it up in the school. She talks about how the kids love to collect the trash in front of people, so they're seen doing it. And it's happening, we're doing this for it. And that sense of pride and responsibility and ownership and feeling like I'm somebody for a group of kids that would otherwise be sort of hidden around the back. It was really important. This is a project, a film called Should, made by the Adventure Syndicate, who work with access to the outdoors, particularly to biking for women and girls in Scotland. And this was the project, again, working with girls from disadvantaged backgrounds in the Central Valley of Scotland and teaching them to mountain bike and to become really competitive and good at mountain biking. And it's a film that takes you through. And they then start taking them bike packing, and they have their night under the stars. And you get to hear their stories. Both of these films are available on the British Mountaineering Council's YouTube channel, where a lot of the films that are shown at Kenya Mountain Festival are to be seen. And there's some fantastic films there of outdoor education projects that are working with all kinds of groups that normally do not get access to the outdoors. It's a fantastic resource to get inspired. The other is on the other end of the spectrum is Singapore. I had the pleasure to work with the Singapore Department for Education since the 90s in the development of outdoor education in their curriculum. And it is now a mandatory part of their school curriculum from primary through to secondary, part of their PE curriculum, and they learn the skills of camping and cooking and navigating and different activities. And they have 3 residentials mandated: upper primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary. And the upper secondary experience of residential is a journey, a 4-day journey. This is the most hyper-urban place on the planet. And you can do a 4-day walking, rowing, sailing, canoeing, or cycling journey off-road, no public roads, all off-road in Singapore, because they've invested in the infrastructure to make it possible to do. And they built the outdoor centres. This is 120,000 kids every year going on a residential. That's what we're talking about in Singapore, which has a population of 6 million and a school population of just over 500,000. They've built their outdoor centres, outward bound, but not just outward bound. Many outdoor centres around Singapore's island and its little offshore islands. They make full use of the quite sheltered waters all around the island to do rowing and sailing and kayaking despite the poisonous seasonings. And they bring nature into the city. They are so bringing nature into the city. Wildlife is coming back that hasn't been seen on the island for 100 years. And these are the very fantastic parts of their new botanic garden that I've been lucky enough to visit on a couple of occasions, which is a fantastic educational resource as well, of course. These towers are not just architectural, are not just mimicking trees. They actually collect the water and the solar power that powers the whole garden, that feeds the whole garden, so that it's a circular system in Singapore. And these fantastic bike trails all the way around their coast. They had old railway lines that have been restored to create walking and cycle trails. They've created outdoor centres in various strategic pockets inland and around the coast. And this last year, just before COVID, was the year when they worked their way through to the point where they were doing the expeditions. And I was lucky enough to join one of the cycling expeditions for a couple of days as they toured around the north coast of Singapore, visiting various social projects and lending a hand. So we're doing social work as well as the outdoor activity. So, to sum up, outdoor education has been part of the life of those fortunate enough to live in the suitable places and to be encouraged by parents and teachers to go outdoors and explore. And we've had the benefit of the capital, if you like, that we've been able to gain from that, both in our non-formal as well as our formal educational experiences. However, this hasn't been the case for many urban dwellers, despite the development of outdoor centres in the 50s and 60s from most local education authorities. It is still the case that many young people do not have these opportunities, either on a regular or even an occasional basis. Is, for me, absolutely the right of young people to have these opportunities, to have the access close to home as well as in remote and further away places, and to feel that they have the opportunity to value these opportunities in all kinds of different ways, all the different opportunities that like sport, like the arts, the outdoors can offer. It's a powerful curriculum tool to restore aspiration, offer inclusion and participation. If you're one of those young people, and I'm still in touch with two of them, who came out of that in terms of curriculum program, went to college and got a trade, and now in one case runs a therapy project in Spain, and the other case runs a canoeing business in Northwood. You can certainly speak to that. I think the outdoors and nature are a cultural good in our society, just like sport and just like the arts. They have a value in our cultural life as part of our educational provision. So I think it should be in schools, both as a subject, contributing to curriculum development, and as a process, a way of learning, a pedagogy that creates these different kinds of opportunities, relationships, and experiences. Like sport and the arts, it's a complex and rich landscape which appeals to almost all young people in some way, who just find the right spot for them. It has the potential to do what Bernstein was after, to develop young people who are participants in society, who are autonomous learners and young citizens, who are aware of their rights and willing to take responsibility. Perhaps when society finally realizes that the means by which we educate young people needs a bit of an overhaul, it's possible to imagine a school day which stops in the classroom at lunchtime. And after lunch, a different group of professionals come along, and off you go. For arts, for sports, for nature, for the outdoors, for work experience, for community service, for things that engage you in that real world that the school is supposed to be preparing you for. That would be a natural home for me for all of those experiences, a way of organising the school day that's practiced in some nations, and a way of developing a new profession that's skilled at working in that way, rather than asking teachers to be all things to all people. Let those teachers use the outdoors for their curriculum purposes and their other formal educational purposes, and let others with a different pedagogy, the kind of youth social worker kind of approach, to make the most of those broader opportunities that the outdoors has to offer. Perhaps we're actually asking the wrong question of research when we say, does outdoor education work? Rather, I would be interested to know the answer to the question, does education in the classroom work? And Pete Higgins, Professor of Outdoor Education at Edinburgh, to thank for that perspective. And maybe we need to, in our society as it is today, take Bernstein a step forward from those conforming and flexible citizens to flexible and transforming citizens, capable of doing something new with the world around us, in both our social and environmental issues that we face today. That surely would be a great outcome from an education for all young people, to which outdoor education can play a part. Let's bring nature and the outdoors to the people. Thank you. Very happy to take questions and comments. There's a slide up now about our MA, which Karen mentioned at the beginning, and I'm very happy to take questions about that as well, if anyone is interested. But we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure